You think this old man can start an A-10? You've got to be kidding. Captain Harris scoffed, his voice dripping with arrogance as he stood with his arms crossed, staring down at the weathered veteran before him. Tom Marshall didn't flinch. He didn't move. His eyes, pale blue and steady, were locked on the massive A-10 Warthog in front of him. The sound of engines revving and jets soaring through the sky filled the air, but Tom remained quiet. Captain Harris couldn't help but smirk, looking at the old man's hands, gnarled with age, the rough skin that told a story of battles fought long ago. The kind of story that didn't fit in with the shiny, polished, high-tech world of modern military machinery. Hey, Pop, I don't know what you think you can do, but I've got a whole crew of engineers. You're going to need more than a couple of old war stories to get this bird in the air. He chuckled, glancing over at his younger soldiers who joined in with snickers and laughs. Tom's gaze didn't waver. He had heard this before, seen this kind of skepticism 1,000 times. Young men who thought they knew everything. But he knew this plane, and he knew it better than any of them ever would. He had been there when it was first designed, when it was first tested, and when it was flown into combat. And he had been the one to keep it running when the world seemed like it was falling apart. I came here because I was asked to, Tom finally said, his voice low and calm, cutting through the arrogance in the air like a knife. And I'll get it started. Just watch. Captain Harris rolled his eyes. Yeah, sure. Watch this, old man. He gestured to one of the technicians nearby to turn off the fuel supply. The young soldiers laughed, their taunts growing louder, but Tom ignored them. Slowly, methodically, he walked toward the A-10. His movements were deliberate, not rushed. His hands, though old, moved with the confidence of someone who had done this 100 times before. The men stood back, watching with increasing disbelief as Tom moved to the cockpit, opening the hatch with practiced ease. As he settled into the seat, the crowd grew silent, the playful jeers turning to whispers. Captain Harris stepped forward, his arms still, folded, but a hint of uncertainty starting to creep into his face. Tom adjusted the dials, his hands moving over the controls as if the plane itself was an old friend. He turned the ignition. The engine sputtered. Then it roared to life. The deafening sound of the A-10's engines filled the air, shaking the ground beneath them. The crowd gasped, and for a moment, everything seemed to freeze. The young soldiers, who had laughed at Tom just moments ago, were now silent, staring in awe. Captain Harris's smirk disappeared, replaced by wide eyes as he took a step back. What the hell? He whispered under his breath. Just then, Colonel Michael Turner appeared at the edge of the tarmac, drawn by the noise and the commotion. He strode toward the plane, his expression serious but impressed. What's going on here? He demanded. Captain Harris straightened up, trying to regain his composure. Sir, this guy just... Before he could finish, Colonel Turner raised a hand, cutting him off. He stepped forward and looked at Tom, who was still sitting calmly in the cockpit. Tom Marshall, the colonel said, his voice filled with recognition. I should have known. He nodded at Tom, his face softening into a rare expression of respect. You're a legend. The young soldiers were now completely silent, their eyes wide. The engine of the A-10 hummed, a beast ready for flight, and Captain Harris stood frozen, unable to speak. Tom Marshall smiled, his eyes twinkling with the kind of quiet pride that only comes with a lifetime of service. He didn't need to say anything more. The engines roared again, and the young soldiers, the ones who had mocked him just moments before, were now left standing in stunned silence. Tom Marshall had done it again. The plane was ready, and everyone knew it. The roar of the A-10's engines still echoed in the air as Captain Harris stood frozen, his mouth slightly agape. The sheer power of the aircraft startup had left him stunned. The rest of the soldiers, who moments ago had been laughing, now exchanged nervous glances. But Tom Marshall didn't flinch. He simply sat there, calmly adjusting his gloves, as if this was just another ordinary day for him. Colonel Turner stepped forward, his boots crunching against the gravel as he approached the cockpit. His sharp eyes scanned Tom for a moment before, settling on the young captain. Harris, he barked, his tone cold and commanding. Step back. Captain Harris hesitated for a moment, clearly unsure how to respond. He had just witnessed something he never expected, something that shattered his perception of the old man in front of him. Slowly, he took a step back, his hands moving to his sides as if trying to process what had just happened. Colonel Turner, standing tall with an air of authority, finally turned his gaze back to Tom. "You're still the best at this, aren't you, Marshal?" he said, his voice carrying a mixture of respect and admiration. Tom's eyes flicked up to meet the colonel's, and for a brief moment, there was a shared understanding between them. Two men who had lived through battles, both on the front lines and in the quiet moments of life. "I've been doing this since you were in diapers, Turner," Tom said with a slight smile, his voice steady and calm. It wasn't arrogance, it was just truth, lived and worn into his skin over the years. "You know that better than anyone." Colonel Turner's lips curled into a knowing smile, and for the first time, Captain Harris felt the weight of the situation. He had underestimated the old man, dismissing him as just another relic of a bygone era. But now, the A-10 sat in front of them, ready for takeoff, its engines still roaring like a lion waking from a deep sleep. Harris couldn't shake the feeling that he had been staring at something far more powerful than he could have imagined. Harris stammered, trying to find his words. "I didn't mean." But Colonel Turner wasn't listening. His focus was entirely on Tom Marshall. "You've got 30 minutes, the colonel said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had seen too much and knew exactly how to handle the situation. "Make sure she's ready. This bird isn't just going to sit around while we waste time." Tom nodded, his hands already moving to the controls as he began running through his checks. He was in his element now, the familiar hum of the cockpit around him, the complex instruments, the worn leather seat beneath him. This was his world, a world that no one else seemed to fully understand. As Tom worked, the soldiers stood back, their chatter dying down. For a moment, all that could be heard was the occasional whir of machines and the distant calls of other personnel on the airstrip. Captain Harris, still unsure how to react, crossed his arms and watched. The young soldiers who had once laughed now stood in silence, all of them realizing that they had just witnessed something extraordinary. Tom's hands moved with practiced precision, the confidence of someone who had done this countless times before. And as he finished his final check, he gave a small nod. "She's good to go," he said, his voice as steady as ever. "Now, all we need is a runway." Colonel Turner, who had been watching closely, gave a nod of approval. "Get ready, Harris," he said, a slight grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. "You might just learn something today." Harris swallowed hard. The reality of the situation hit him like a ton of bricks. Tom Marshall wasn't just an old veteran. He was a living legend, one who had seen more, done more, and had more experience than any of them ever would. The A-10's engines roared once more as it prepared for its flight, and for the first time, Harris felt a deep, undeniable respect for the old man sitting in front of him. As the A-10 Warthog roared down the runway, the sound of its engines filled the air, vibrating through the ground and the hearts of those watching. Captain Harris stood at the edge of the tarmac, his arms still crossed, but his posture had shifted. He was no longer mocking. He was watching in awe, unable to take his eyes off the veteran manning the aircraft. Tom Marshall, calm and focused, guided the plane with the kind of confidence that only comes from years of experience. His hands moved over the controls with a smoothness that betrayed his age, but also reflected a lifetime of knowledge. The A-10, once thought to be a relic of the past, came to life in his hands. Captain Harris had expected a struggle, a few missteps. He had expected the old man to fumble, to prove his doubts right. But now, he could feel his confidence waver. Tom wasn't just getting the plane airborne. He was making it look easy. Colonel Turner, who had been standing nearby, watched the scene unfold with quiet approval. He had seen Tom in action before, but even now he couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. The old man had always been good, but today, watching him, Turner was reminded of just how skilled and dedicated he truly was. "She's flying," Tom said, his voice steady over the intercom as the A-10 climbed into the sky. Smooth as silk. The calm tone in Tom's voice contrasted sharply with the thunderous noise of the engines behind him, but it was the same voice that had commanded respect in every battlefield he had ever been on. As the A-10 gained altitude, Captain Harris took a step forward, his gaze fixed on the soaring plane. For the first time, he felt something other than arrogance. Respect. It wasn't just the fact that Tom had started the plane. It was the way he handled it, the way he controlled it with such precision and ease. It was the mark of a true professional, a man who had lived through the fire and emerged unchanged. "I didn't think you had it in you, Marshal," Harris said, his voice barely above a whisper. Tom's laugh crackled through the intercom. "I didn't think you would, either," he replied. It was a small moment of camaraderie between two men from different generations, but it carried a weight that couldn't be ignored. Colonel Turner, who had remained silent up until that point, finally spoke. "Harris, you might want to pay attention. You've just seen how it's done." Captain Harris nodded, still watching the A-10 as it soared higher into the sky. The veteran had proven more than just his ability to start a plane. He had proven that experience and skill could not be measured by age or appearance. They were earned. And in that moment, Captain Harris knew that he had just witnessed a legend in action. The plane circled back, descending toward the runway as smoothly as it had taken off. The sound of the engines roared once again, but now it felt like music to Harris's ears. As the A-10 touched down and rolled to a stop, Tom Marshall gave one final command. "Mission accomplished, Colonel." Colonel Turner smiled, a rare expression for him, but it spoke volumes. "Well done, Marshall. You've earned the right to retire, but I don't think you're ready just yet." Tom chuckled softly, his eyes twinkling with the kind of quiet confidence only someone who had seen it all could have. "Retirement's for the young, Turner. I'll keep flying as long as I'm able." As the A-10 came to a complete stop, the men on the tarmac began to clap. The young soldiers, once full of skepticism and doubt, now recognized the truth. Tom Marshall wasn't just a man who could start a plane. He was a living legend, and today, they had all witnessed that legend come to life. As the day wore on, the tension from earlier seemed to dissipate, but the sense of awe lingered in the air. Tom Marshall had once again shown the younger men that experience was not something you could simply buy or learn from a textbook. It was earned through sweat, grit, and countless hours spent in the cockpit, on the battlefield, and in the quiet moments when the world was still. Captain Harris, still processing what he had witnessed, stood at the edge of the runway, watching as Tom spoke with Colonel Turner. He couldn't shake the feeling that he had missed something important, something that had been right in front of him all along. Harris had spent his life learning from modern technology, from gadgets and systems that promised to make everything easier, faster, and more precise. But Tom had shown him that there was a depth to knowledge and skill that went beyond the digital displays and flashing lights. It was a reminder that not everything could be measured by data points and calculations. As the colonel and the veteran spoke, Harris couldn't help but approach, drawn by the desire to learn, to understand. "Sir," Harris said, trying to find the right words. Colonel Turner turned his head and raised an eyebrow. "What is it, Harris?" "I just wanted to say," Harris began, hesitating for a moment. "I didn't realize what I was looking at before. Tom, I mean. I didn't think a guy like him could still do what he did. But he just showed us all up." Colonel Turner smiled softly, but there was no smugness in it. "You think Tom's done?" he asked. Harris blinked, surprised by the question. "Well, I mean, he's been retired for years, hasn't he?" "He's old, sir." Turner's smile faded slightly, replaced by a more serious expression. "You're right. He's older than you, probably older than your father. But age doesn't mean the same thing to Tom that it does to most people. He's seen things you can't even imagine, and he's learned things you'll never find in a manual." Harris lowered his head, feeling the weight of Turner's words. He had always thought that retirement was a simple thing, that once you hit a certain age, you were done. But Tom Marshall had just proven that there was no such thing as being done for someone with the right experience. "Tom's been in this game longer than you've been alive," Turner continued, his voice steady but filled with respect. "He doesn't need gadgets or fancy equipment to get the job done. He has something more important, wisdom. And that's why he's still here, still doing what he loves." Harris nodded slowly, trying to process everything. He had been so focused on his own career, on climbing the ladder, that he had failed to recognize the value of someone who had already seen it all. "So what's next for him?" Harris asked, his curiosity getting the better of him. Turner's gaze softened, and he glanced over at Tom, who was now chatting with a few other soldiers, his demeanor calm and collected. "Tom's earned the right to retire whenever he wants. But he's not finished. Not yet. There's always something more to learn, something more to do. And when he's ready, he'll go out on his own terms." Harris looked at Tom once again, seeing the quiet strength in his posture, the steady rhythm of his movements. He realized then that he had been wrong about the old man. Tom wasn't just a relic from the past. He was a living testament to what it meant to never stop pushing forward, to never stop learning, no matter how old you got. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the tarmac, Harris couldn't help but feel a deep sense of admiration for Tom. The veteran had taught him something far more valuable than any flight manual or military strategy ever could. He had shown him the true meaning of dedication and the importance of honoring those who had paved the way before. And in that moment, Harris knew that he would never look at the world the same way again. As the days went by, Captain Harris found himself thinking about Tom Marshall more and more. The old veteran had left an impression on him that he couldn't shake, a mark that went deeper than just the flight that day. It was something about the way Tom carried himself, the quiet confidence, the knowledge that came from years of experience. Every time Harris thought about it, he realized just how much he had taken for granted in his own life. He had been so focused on climbing the military ladder, on achieving goals and ticking off boxes, that he had missed the one thing that truly mattered: respect. Respect for those who had already climbed, who had already been through the fire and come out the other side. One evening, as Harris walked down the tarmac to the briefing room, he spotted Tom standing alone, looking up at the sky. The old man had been more than just a pilot. He had been a witness to history, a part of something greater than anyone could explain in a classroom or a debriefing. Harris approached him, feeling a sense of nervousness he couldn't quite explain. "Hey, Tom," he said, his voice tentative at first. "Got a minute?" Tom didn't turn right away. He just kept staring at the sky, his hands resting comfortably at his sides. But then, after a long pause, he finally spoke, his voice low and steady. "What's on your mind, Harris?" Harris hesitated. There were so many things he wanted to ask, so many things he wanted to say. But for the first time in his life, he realized that sometimes it wasn't about asking questions. It was about listening. "I've been thinking," Harris began, his voice gaining confidence. "About everything. About the way I used to see things. About how I used to look at you. I didn't get it before. But now I see it. I see what you've done, what you've been through. And I have to say, I respect you. I don't think I've ever really understood that word until now." Tom turned to face him, his eyes filled with something Harris couldn't quite place. Maybe it was recognition, maybe understanding. But whatever it was, it felt like the weight of years of service had just shifted in the air between them. "Respect isn't something you earn in a day, Harris," Tom said quietly, his voice almost a whisper. "It's something you build, piece by piece, moment by moment. And it doesn't matter if it's a plane, a battlefield, or just a handshake. It's the little things that count." Harris nodded, absorbing the words, feeling the truth of them resonate deep inside him. "I've spent my whole life chasing promotions, chasing recognition. I thought it was about being the best, the fastest, the brightest. But I see now, it's about something more." Tom's gaze softened. "It's about earning your place, not by showing off or boasting, but by proving that you can still do the job when it counts. And by being there for the people who need you, even when no one else is looking." Harris stood there for a long moment, the weight of Tom's words settling over him. He had been chasing the wrong things. The respect he had been seeking wasn't something that could be given with a promotion or a title. It had to be earned, not in front of an audience, but in the quiet moments when no one was watching. "I get it now," Harris said, his voice firm. "And I'll remember that. I'll do better. For myself and for the guys who come after me." Tom gave him a slow nod, his expression unreadable but somehow reassuring. "You'll be all right, Harris. You've got the right heart. Just make sure you always remember why you're here." The two men stood in silence for a while, staring up at the stars. The world around them felt quiet, but in that moment, it felt full of possibility. Harris wasn't just looking at the sky anymore. He was looking at his future, and for the first time, he understood what it meant to truly respect someone, and to be respected in return. The next morning, Captain Harris arrived early to the base, the crisp air of the dawn cutting through the stillness. The hangar was empty, save for a few technicians working on the planes. He walked through the rows of aircraft, his mind still replaying the conversation he had with Tom the night before. He had spent hours thinking about what it meant to truly respect someone, to learn not just from their words but from their actions. Tom had taught him something that no textbook or lecture ever could. It wasn't about being the fastest, the strongest, or the most decorated. It was about perseverance, about showing up every day, no matter the odds, and doing the job with everything you had. Harris glanced up at the planes, his eyes landing on the A-10 that Tom had piloted so effortlessly. The old warhorse of the skies, a symbol of strength and endurance. It was more than just a machine. It was a part of history, and it had been brought to life once again by someone who understood what it took to make it soar. As he approached the plane, Harris saw Tom sitting on a nearby bench, his jacket draped over his shoulders as he watched the technicians work. There was a calmness about him, a stillness that came from years of experience. Harris took a deep breath and walked over to him. "Morning, Tom," he said, his voice steady. Tom looked up from his thoughts and gave him a small nod. "Morning, Harris." "I've been thinking," Harris began, feeling a bit unsure of himself. "About everything you said the other day. About respect, about experience. I don't think I've ever truly understood it until now. I've spent so much time trying to be the best, to be the fastest, but I never really thought about what it means to do something because it's the right thing to do, not just for the accolades." Tom smiled softly, a quiet pride in his eyes. "You're starting to get it," he said. "The truth is, it's not about being the fastest or the loudest. It's about being there when it counts, stepping up when others don't, and doing the work even when no one's watching. That's where real respect comes from." Harris nodded, the weight of Tom's words sinking in. "I spent so much time looking for the next promotion, the next badge, but I never realized that the true reward comes from doing the job well and being there for those around you." "Exactly," Tom replied. "It's about the people you're with, the ones who have your back, and the ones you have to carry. You earn respect by showing up, not by waiting for someone to hand it to you." Harris looked at the A-10 again, the old plane now feeling like a symbol of everything Tom had said. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't new, but it had been through hell and back and kept flying. "I think I've been doing this all wrong," Harris said quietly. "It's not about climbing the ladder. It's about being the person others can count on, no matter what. It's about the small moments, the quiet decisions, the trust you build over time." Tom patted the bench next to him. "You're getting it, Harris. And you'll find that the higher you climb, the more you'll need that trust, that respect. It's what keeps everything running, even when it feels like everything's falling apart." Harris sat down next to him, his eyes on the A-10. For the first time in a long while, he felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. "I'm ready to learn, Tom. I'm ready to do it the right way." Tom's smile was small, but it was there, a sign that, for once, Harris had found the truth he'd been searching for. And in that moment, Harris knew that the path ahead wouldn't be easy, but it would be worth it, because now he understood what it truly meant to earn respect, not through titles or achievements, but through actions, through dedication, and through the quiet moments that defined a lifetime. The following week, things started to change around the base. The young soldiers who had once mocked Tom Marshall now looked at him with new eyes. It wasn't obvious at first, but it was there, small gestures of respect, little nods when he passed by, the kind of quiet acknowledgement that speaks louder than words. Captain Harris found himself looking at his men differently too. The drive to prove himself, to rise above the rest, seemed a little less important now. Instead, he focused more on being a leader who could be counted on when it mattered. That was the lesson Tom had taught him. One afternoon, as Harris was walking through the hangar, he saw Tom working on a small task with a group of younger soldiers. Tom had his sleeves rolled up, his hands expertly tightening a bolt on an aircraft engine. The soldiers were watching him closely, their faces serious as they followed his every move. Harris stopped for a moment to watch. He had always known that Tom was a skilled mechanic, but seeing him work in the quiet focus of the hangar was something else. It was the kind of mastery that couldn't be taught. It had to be earned. "You know, I never thought I'd see the day when I'd be taking notes from a guy older than my father," one of the soldiers muttered to another. Harris overheard the comment and smiled to himself. He wasn't sure if Tom had heard it, but he saw the corner of his mouth twitch, just for a second. Tom looked up and caught Harris's eye, giving him a quick nod. Harris returned the nod, a silent acknowledgement of everything that had changed in such a short time. Tom didn't need words to teach a lesson. He did it with his actions, with his steady presence, and with the quiet dignity that radiated from him. It was a kind of leadership that spoke volumes without ever raising a voice. "How's it going, Harris?" Tom called out as he approached. "Everything running smooth." Harris shrugged slightly, but there was a new confidence in his movements. "It's going," he said. "We're getting there." Tom chuckled softly and wiped his hands on a rag. "That's how it is. One day at a time, one bolt at a time." Harris's smile was genuine this time, a reflection of everything he had learned. "You're right," he said. "One step at a time." As the days passed, the men around the base began to notice a shift. The usual tension that had once filled the air was gone, replaced by something more grounded. It wasn't that everyone was suddenly best friends. It wasn't about that. It was about respect, respect for experience, for wisdom, and for the hard work that went into every day, every moment. The soldiers started to ask Tom more questions about his past, about his time in the service, but they did it differently now. It wasn't out of curiosity or to hear war stories. It was out of a desire to understand, to learn. And Tom, as always, answered with a quiet humility, never bragging, never boasting. He simply shared what he had lived, what he had seen. One day, as the base prepared for a routine exercise, Colonel Turner called Harris into his office. "Harris, you've been doing well," he said, his voice as steady and calm as always. "But I want to see you put everything you've learned into action. You've got leadership potential. I'm assigning you to lead this next operation." Harris looked at the colonel, his heart pounding in his chest. It wasn't the promotion he had once dreamed of, but it was a new kind of responsibility. A responsibility to be the kind of leader Tom had shown him how to be. "Thank you, sir," Harris said, his voice steady. "I won't let you down." "I know you won't," Colonel Turner said with a small smile. "You've got what it takes." Harris left the office with a new sense of purpose. He wasn't just going to climb the ranks anymore. He was going to do it the right way, by earning the respect of the men around him, one action at a time. As he walked down the hallway, he passed Tom, who was standing near the door to the hangar. "Looks like you're moving up, Harris," Tom said, a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Harris stopped and met his eyes. "I'm trying to," he said. "I've got a long way to go." Tom nodded. "We all do. But as long as you're moving forward, that's what matters." Harris gave him a nod of gratitude, feeling the weight of Tom's words settle in his chest. There was still so much to learn, but now he understood that the journey was just as important as the destination. And with that, he walked toward the next challenge, knowing that the true measure of a leader wasn't in the title, but in the trust and respect of those who followed. The morning of the operation arrived faster than Harris expected. The sun was still low in the sky, casting long shadows across the base as he walked toward the briefing room. His heart beat steadily, but he could feel the weight of the responsibility pressing down on him. This was his moment, the moment he had worked for. But now, it felt different. It wasn't about the promotion, the title, or the accolades. It was about leading the men who trusted him, about making the right decisions when everything was on the line. As he walked into the briefing room, he saw the familiar faces of the soldiers who had once looked at him with doubt. But now, they looked to him with respect. The transformation had been subtle, but undeniable. They had seen him grow, seen him earn his place, and now, they were ready to follow him. Tom Marshall was there too, standing in the back, watching quietly. His presence was a steady anchor in the room, a reminder of everything Harris had learned. Harris stood at the front, taking a deep breath. Before he addressed the group, "All right, listen up," he began, his voice calm but firm. "We've got a mission ahead of us. It's not about speed or flashy moves. It's about doing the job, staying focused, and getting it done without any mistakes. Everyone has their role, and I trust each one of you to do it." His eyes swept over the room, meeting each of their gazes, making sure they knew he meant it. This was no longer just about him. It was about them, about the team. "We're all in this together. Stay sharp, stay disciplined, and we'll come out of this the way we came in, together." The room was silent for a moment, the gravity of his words settling in. Then, slowly, the soldiers nodded, their expressions hardening with determination. They were ready. "All right, let's move out," Harris said, his voice ringing with confidence. The men stood and filed out of the room, heading to their respective positions. Tom stayed behind for a moment, watching Harris as he prepared to leave. When the room had cleared, he walked over to Harris, giving him a small nod. "You've got this," Tom said quietly, his voice low but filled with sincerity. Harris smiled, grateful for the support. "Thanks, Tom. I wouldn't be here without you." Tom gave him a simple nod, a gesture that spoke volumes. "Keep your head in the game." You've learned more than you realize. Harris watched as Tom turned and walked out of the room, the old veteran moving with the same quiet confidence he had always had. As Harris made his way to the command center, he felt the weight of the responsibility on his shoulders, but it no longer felt overwhelming. He wasn't alone. He had earned the respect of his men, and they had earned his. This was the kind of leadership Tom had taught him, steady, grounded, and unwavering. The operation went smoothly, every soldier doing their part, every move calculated and precise. It wasn't flashy, but it was effective. By the time they returned to base, the sun was setting, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink. Harris felt a quiet sense of pride. This wasn't just a victory in the field. It was a victory of leadership, of trust, and of respect. When the team returned to the hangar, the usual chatter filled the air, but there was a different energy now. The soldiers didn't just look at Harris as their superior. They looked at him as someone they could trust, someone who had earned their respect. As Harris walked through the hangar, he saw Tom standing by the A-10, watching as the soldiers worked. He walked over to him, his smile genuine. "We did it, Tom," Harris said, his voice filled with quiet satisfaction. Tom looked at him for a moment, then nodded. "You did it, Harris. You led them well." Harris felt the weight of those words. He hadn't just completed a mission. He had taken the first real step toward becoming the leader he had always wanted to be. A leader who didn't seek respect. He earned it, day by day, with every decision, every action. "Thanks, Tom," Harris said quietly. "I couldn't have done it without you." Tom gave him a knowing look, a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "You had it in you all along." Harris looked at the A-10, the old warbird that had seen so much, just like its pilot. He understood now. It wasn't about being the fastest, the strongest, or the most decorated. It was about being there when it mattered, doing the job no matter how hard, and earning respect the right way. The journey was long, and Harris knew he still had much to learn, but for the first time, he was ready to lead. Ready to earn the respect of those who would follow him, just like Tom had earned his. Weeks passed, and the air on base had shifted once more. The sound of the engines, the hum of the aircraft, and the chatter of soldiers preparing for missions were all still present. But now there was an underlying sense of unity. Harris had earned the respect of the men around him, not by boasting or seeking approval, but by simply showing up every day, doing the work, and being there when it counted. The transformation wasn't immediate, but it was real. Harris no longer saw himself just as a captain climbing the ranks. He saw himself as a leader, one who had a responsibility not only to his superiors but to the men and women under his command. And he was ready for it. He often found himself reflecting on the quiet moments with Tom Marshall. It wasn't just about the flying or the tactics. It was about how Tom carried himself. He had the kind of quiet confidence that made others want to follow, and Harris realized that he, too, could lead in the same way. As Harris walked through the hangar one morning, he spotted Tom working on an aircraft. It was a small task, something that most wouldn't think twice about, but watching Tom handle it with such ease, Harris could see the difference. It wasn't the physical act that mattered. It was the steady, patient approach. Tom didn't rush. He didn't get flustered. He just did what needed to be done. "You're looking good out there, Harris," Tom said, looking up as Harris approached. "I see you've been taking things one step at a time." Harris smiled, feeling the weight of the compliment. It wasn't just about his actions. It was about how he had grown. "Thanks, Tom," Harris replied, his voice steady. "I've learned from the best." Tom chuckled softly. "You're getting there. But remember, it's not about being perfect. It's about doing the right thing when it counts." Harris nodded, the words sinking in deeper than ever. "That's what I'm aiming for. To be there when it counts." The days passed, and soon enough, Harris found himself leading another mission, this time one that was more complex and required more coordination than ever before. But this time, he wasn't nervous. He wasn't looking for validation. He was focused, clear-headed, and ready. The team worked like a well-oiled machine, each soldier doing their part without hesitation. They trusted each other, and Harris led them without a second thought. As they wrapped up the operation successfully, Harris stood by the debriefing table, listening to the feedback from his team. The praise was not directed at him, but at the team as a whole, and that was exactly how he wanted it. It wasn't about him being the hero. It was about the collective effort of everyone involved. Later that day, as Harris sat in the command center reviewing the mission, he heard a knock on the door. He looked up to see Colonel Turner standing in the doorway. "Good job, Harris," the colonel said, his tone calm but full of approval. "The team performed well, and you handled the leadership role with confidence. Keep this up, and you'll go far." Harris nodded, grateful but humble. "Thanks, sir. I've learned a lot from those around me." The colonel smiled, a rare sight. "That's the right attitude, Harris. Keep it up." As Harris left the command center, he felt the weight of the colonel's words. But it wasn't the colonel's approval that mattered most. It was the quiet acknowledgement from his team, the respect he had earned through his actions, and the trust he had built over time. That was what truly mattered. Walking back to the hangar, Harris spotted Tom once more, working on the same aircraft. This time, there was no need for words. Harris simply gave him a nod, and Tom returned it, the silent acknowledgement passing between them. Harris had learned something valuable in those quiet moments with Tom. Leadership wasn't about titles or recognition. It was about earning the trust and respect of those around you, day in and day out, through your actions and your character. As Harris moved forward in his career, he knew that this was just the beginning. The path ahead wasn't going to be easy, but he was ready for it. With each step, he would continue to earn the respect of those who followed him, just as he had learned to do from the best, Tom Marshall.